I think the Institute was very, very much affected by what was going on in the country and in the world around it. And this, of course, is referring to the escalation of the Vietnam War, the introduction, as it were, and the use of drugs, marijuana, LSD. I think then, of course, aside from the war, there was Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy was shot. There were things happening outside to which we had really rather strong reactions, not only our student body, but certainly our faculty. Mm-hmm. And as far as the Vietnam War, it became very clear that there was a big division among the faculty, and I'm sure among the students probably too, but certainly among the faculty, as to where the country should be, what the school should be doing. We had the November Action Days. We had the march on the what's now the Draper Lab. All of these things really kept things kind of very tense for part of the time.
Mm-hmm. And how...
I'm sorry. Okay, sorry.
You know, I noticed in your remarks you said that what I thought was understatement, you said it was a time that was certainly interesting. And then you mentioned that the students actions had begun in 1968, and you said by 1970 we had a somewhat quieter time. 2 years must have been quite a long time in your personal life to have dealt with all those issues at home. It must have been a tremendous strain for Howard as president and for you. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, I
the
think
personal impact?
There was some strain, sure. We had three, let's see, our youngest, I think when we moved in the president's house, was 11. And so we had an active family with very strong opinions as to what was going on at the time. Of course, the days were long as far as the president was concerned, but he had a wonderful group with whom he worked. Mm-hmm. The academic council was extremely supportive. They were quite well organized and in very close contact all of the time. It is true
It was virtually a state of emergency, as I recall. I mean, there was
well,
constantly...
you remember it. You were there too.
Yes.
And a lot of the time, of course, there were some real crises when they took over the president's office, and a lot of negotiations going on. A lot of negotiations with the city and the protection of life and property and that sort of thing. Then the student center was occupied, and that was a 24-hour-a-day operation with people coming in from all over, and that was part of the problem. There were other college students came in. The place was wild. Mm-hmm. And I always remember when that student left, I went over to see what was left. I was particularly concerned about the floor of the Salo Puerto Rico, which is, of course, where that student was. And
do you want to say a little bit about the student so that people will know what you're referring to?
Well, this was an AWOL Marine. And I really don't know how he actually got to where he was. I really don't know how he got to be sitting up in the corner of the Salo Puerto Rico. But after they had gone, and I went over there, and I never saw so many pieces of gum on the floor. The floor was literally littered with chewed gum that people had parked and gotten tired of chewing. Of course, gum comes off, I think, fairly easily.
Yeah.
And they had it cleaned up in a hurry. but there were
Well, now,
sometimes.
when the Institute was going through all of this, how did this affect, I mean, what was your role, do you think, in relation to the Institute and in relation to Howard? I mean, were you directly involved? Was your house under?
Yes, a couple of times. There was a pipe, and they would parade in front of the little circular driveway in front of the president's house.
So you
And,
actually had some concern about the physical
yes, we
safety
did.
of yourself
But
and your
Campus
children?
Patrol, there again, Campus Patrol had someone watching the house really quite carefully. There was only one time that we were told to leave the house, and we did. And we went to a friend's house in Brookline and stayed overnight. We forgot to take the cat. That was the big crisis.
A
We took the dog, but we
catastrophe?
forgot our daughter's cat. And she
Right.
was very distressed that
Yeah. How old were your
He's
children, your
fine.
kids at the time?
they
You had
were
to
in.
settle, your son was,
Yeah,
you were the
well,
youngest?
they were in
High school?
high school, high school and junior high school.
How did they take all of this? Was this a,
Well, they seemed to take it in stride. They survived.
you did
They
too.
had definite feelings, particularly our oldest, who was in high school at that time.
Well, when they look
And
back,
he was,
frightening or?
well, no, I don't think so. No, I don't believe so. No. don't
and
think
when
so.
you look back,
Oh, I wouldn't want to do it again, probably. And you always think you could do things better if you did them again, but
Yeah.
no, it was an ongoing thing. I always thought I should keep a diary of some sort, and it's interesting to me, no one has really written up
What
those
happened?
times. Not just on this campus, but whether it's Michigan or whether it was San Francisco.
or Cornell, I remember
Or
Cornell. that,
Cornell,
had-
or whatever school. To my knowledge, no one has really felt like sitting down and looking at it from the perspective of either a student at the Times or the administration of the school at that
I think it's
Times.
too painful for people
I
to,
wonder if it is, if still maybe too fresh for some
yeah,
of us.
too searing, that such
Yeah.
memories. Were universities in touch with each other or were
Oh,
wives?
very much so.
I mean,
very
did you
much
talk
so.
to other wives, for example, whose
Yes,
husbands were
there,
going
there
through
is
this?
the association of, I don't recall how many universities that meet annually. And there are subcommittees. The wives go to the annual meeting. And so we did meet other wives at that time. We met in places like, Williamsburg, for instance, one year, which was an oasis for everybody at the time.
Right.
But
It was away from
we
an urban-
we did talk to each other, yes, although not as an ongoing thing. You didn't just call up Mrs. Fleming at Michigan or something like that and say, "Well, how are you today?" But I know that my husband did talk to presidents and other schools.
Yeah, because there were other
Yeah.
presidents whose
Yes.
careers as presidents really ended during that
Well,
time because
I
the
know he and
attacks were...
Kingman Brewster talked, and also Nate Pusey at Harvard. Sure, they talked.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
right.
If I can interject for 1 second, Jocelyn, if you could try to include a little bit of the question in your response.
Oh, all right.
So if she asked you if the president's wives were in touch, you could say yes, I was in touch with some of the other, without it being too uncomfortable,
all right.
awkward. Just try and keep that in mind. And also, if you could let her kind of complete the answers a little more, you're kind of stepping on a little bit.
Mhm.
And I think we might have
Okay.
trouble hearing the response because your voice is a bit louder than hers. So if you
Okay,
could let her
fine.
conclude the response before you ask the next question.
Mm-hmm,
That would be very helpful.
mm-hmm, okay.
Yes, sir.
Is there something else?
No, well said.
Yeah. Now, when all of this was going on, you still had to be responsible for organizing a lot of other things at MIT, probably. And how did you manage what you construed as your other
Well,
responsibilities,
as-
both for your family and MIT.
As far as organizing things at the Institute, things were very much the same. The faculty wives met, the committees met, the interest groups met, volunteerism went on, the furniture exchange functioned. We weren't in any sense in a state of paralysis or anything like that. We did what we had been doing and what we continued to do later. Wasn't changed.
Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the volunteer activities that went on during that time that interested you? Were there particular matters that you were involved with that were of particular interest to you?
Well, the interest groups were very much then the same, I think, as they are now. I can't think of any that don't exist, and a few have been added. And that was always a pleasure. We did our Christmas decorating, we had the Bloodmobile, we did all of those things that we still do today.
And what were there some particular activities that interested you, that you particularly participated in during that period?
Well, I've been a bird watcher for a lot of years. Ellen Sizer was the one that started the bird group, and she should get a lot of credit for it's still ongoing and very, very active, and I enjoyed that, but I enjoyed the other things too.
Did you? I had a vague recollection that you participated in some other women's league activity. That was and you're still a bird watcher, I believe. You
Oh,
haven't
yes,
stopped.
I am.
Do you want to tell a little bit about?
Well, that's just simply a hobby of Howard's and mine.
Yeah.
And we go birding.
Has there been any interesting sightings on campus? I know every once in a while I see
Yes,
some
the
hawks
owl.
flying
Yes, the owl. For several years, right outside these windows, we had a barred owl. And it really helped take care of the pigeon population. It kept that down considerably. We are close enough, of course, to Mount Auburn, which is one of the great birding spots, so that an oasis like our courtyard and our gardens and so on. And that's one thing that was a part of the years in which we were here. This was the period in which we started the pocket gardens in the different little alcoves and places around the Institute. We had the Julie Fassett Garden, and of course I was on the committee for the fundraising for that, and a garden at Endicott House with benches and places for people to relax. And it was also during that period that they started adding about 1% of the cost of a new building to be used for art in the building. And so when you look at our brand new biology lab, which was just dedicated last week, and you have these wonderful tile things.
Isn't that beautiful?
And the
Yeah.
art in the different buildings around the campus, that permanent art collection for these different buildings, as well as being built into the building, was started in Howard Johnson's administration. And I think it's added a great deal to our campus and the buildings.
I think many people would be surprised at the transformation of this campus from what it was in the early 60s.
I think some of the alumni would notice a big difference, Al.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what MIT looked like when you got here? What the difference is?
Well, if you look down the main corridor, I wouldn't say it looks too different. But if you look around the edges, it's warmer, it's softer, I think. And of course, it has, I don't know how many new buildings, but a lot.
There was no art on the campus, I think, that there were.
Well, there had been an art committee, and then the art council was started somewhere in that period, and of course it's still very much an ongoing, active thing. So they worked together, pretty much, and I trust they still do.
Well, do you have other high points that you'd like to talk about during your career as wife of the president?
Well, I think the role of women was changing very definitely. It was during that time that McCormick House, the second part of the McCormick House, was built. Catherine McCormick was a very, very special person in what she left the Institute. Being a fairly young institution, we didn't have lots of historical things handed down through the centuries, sort of thing. And she endowed us with some very beautiful china and glass, and the contents of her house over on Commonwealth Avenue. And this added many interesting things, I think, to the president's house. She left. It was the residue of her estate. As you know, she was interested in the League of Women Voters. She was interested in birth control. She left $1 million to the Rock Institute, which was doing research on this is the pill. And I think during this period, the pill became very much into more common usage than it had ever been before, and the access to it was quietly done and unobtrusively done. It was also during this period, this time, that a really, really conscious effort was made to increase the number of women coming to this campus. And of course, with McCormick Hall and the second tower, it really did give parents and the students themselves a real place to live. And I can remember Margaret Compton describing the living facilities in a house that something like 12 women students lived in Bay State Road, and that was the housing for women at MIT. It was pretty grim. You had to come here and be prepared to live in town and make your own way. You had not a comfortable, organized place to be. And Catherine McCormick made it possible to have what we have today, which is very different.
Now that you mentioned Margaret Compton, do you want to talk a little bit about what your experience was with the wives of the presidents who preceded you? Were there mentors or role models, or?
As far as the wives and the women at MIT, of course, there were the few outstanding ones like Ellen Swallow Richards, and there were several others. But MIT, and I have a wonderful picture, which I know is in the archives, of Margaret Compton and Liz Killian and Kay Stratton and myself. And I don't think Leah was there at that point. Margaret was a wonderful person. It was an entirely different campus. There wasn't the traffic on Memorial Drive. She tells about an Irish setter they had that was all over the campus, and just everybody knew that it was Dr. Compton's Irish setter.
Was it a female?
I don't know. That I don't know. All of the wives are very different people. We bring a lot of different things to the job in different times. But I must say we like each other very much, and we enjoy being with each other. And now we're fewer of us because both Liz and Margaret are gone.
Would you like to talk a little bit about how you see the differences in the what you brought to your roles?
If I could ask a more general question, if I could ask what you feel the role of the First Lady is.
Oh boy,
Or-
I gotta blow my nose.
Okay.
I've got sinus,
You're
and
more-
as soon as I started, I had a hard act to follow because I had to follow Kay Stratton, and that wasn't easy. And she was very, very good. Margaret had moved off the campus and lived over on Beacon Street at that time. And I think during the Depression, I think money was very hard to come by. I think the budget was slim. Tuition, of course, was much, much lower. It was a different place in which to live. And I think the whole development of curriculum, of more social kind of a place, all came during the Strattons and the Johnsons and kind of has continued over the years.
And
As far as the role as an individual, I think the first and foremost thing you want to do is help your husband in any way that it looks like you could. And we did do a lot of entertaining. I mean, we serve everything from breakfast to a cup of tea to cocktails to dinners and whatever. And those were planned. And we had a staff at that time, and that took time. We spent a lot of time, truthfully, planning menus and for various numbers of people.
do you want to talk a little bit more about what constitutes support of your husbands in that role and how you felt some of the other women carried? I mean, there must have been big differences in the way that operated for the wives. Do you have any?
I don't know. I only know myself. No, I'm not sure there were. I think that at that time in your life, that was where you were, and that was what you were doing, and that was what you concentrated on. And in a limited way, I think that I can think of two cases where a wife was not interested in the school or in being the president's wife and doing whatever that entailed, and it had a definite effect. I think it could. I think it is important. And I suppose I say that partly because if you're going to do it, you need to think it is important because that's what you're doing at that time in your life.
Was that I know that Kay Stratton in her remarks at the luncheon mentioned that she and her family, she used the phrase, moved into the president's house with a great deal of trepidation and felt that they had to redefine their lives. Was that?
Yes, of course, that's true. We moved from Lexington into this house. We had help, as it were. We had big rooms instead of small rooms. We'd meet before dinner in the den, and then everybody would fan out to do their homework and sort of disappear in this big space. So it is a question of keeping together and spending as much time, particularly on weekends, just really blocking out time.
For your private life.
For your own private lives, which if you have family growing, you must do. And I think maybe some people aren't doing it as much now as they should do. I don't know, from statistics that you read.
But when you talk about, the whole notion of having to redefine your life and think differently about it, had you ever imagined that you would be in such a role? I mean, what had you thought about? What were some of the things you were interested in?
No, I had never imagined it. I hadn't indeed.
Didn't you
No.
start out in music yourself?
Yes, I
Do you want to talk a little bit about the evolution?
No, I didn't follow through. I switched from music and did some other line of work. I did personnel work.
Uh-huh. But you hadn't imagined moving into the role?
No, that, of course.
I
don't think my husband ever really thought that he was going to do that either.
Was it something you agonized about, or it seemed...
Oh, no.
Wasn't a big... adjustment.
It was a big adjustment, but you did it, you know, and that was that.
Yeah.
And in retrospect, I must say it's been a wonderful experience.
Uh-huh. Do you feel that you changed considerably in the midst of that experience? That it was a big, I mean, in learning to adapt to all
I
the...
probably did, but I wasn't aware of it.
Uh-huh.
You certainly did have to adapt, yes, sure.
Uh-huh. Because I noticed that everyone talked about the kinds of people you were constantly, in all the wives in their presentations at the luncheon talked about the kinds of people you dealt with and all, with a bit of awe and amusement.
Oh my,
at
yes, yes, yes. And here you were meeting somebody, but it was fun. And it was, you know, and looking back on it, you know, all you can say is, it's been wonderful. You're just grateful you were there.
Uh-huh. And when it comes to what you, I mean, if you want to talk a little bit more, when you came into this room, you talked about the furnishing of this room. What about converting that rather awe-inspiring mansion into your family home?
Well, the history of the house is kind of interesting. The Stone Webster was the builder of this, the main MIT campus on this side of the river. And they gave the president's house to the Institute as a gift. And as I understand it, it was their fee for having their profit, as it were, from having built the building. And the architect was a man by the name of Wells Bosworth. And he designed that house on the plan of a French townhouse with a straight up and down facade in front, abutting the street. And then in the back was the garden surrounded by a wall with a gazebo and so on. And the rooms are big, the ceilings are high. But there is a little room off one of the main rooms that we use kind of for our small family gatherings. And there was a little room off the back kitchen where we had breakfast. And as a family, with everybody off to get their rides and their carpools and whatnot. And so you make your space. You make your space. Now, as far as the decorating of the house, I'm sure many people over the years have noticed a difference. The furnishings in the house get heavy use. I remember having the rug cleaned once, and after it looked, I thought, really very nice, and the head man said, you know, I've never seen a rug with so many cigarette burns. Now, you go to that house today, and there's not an ashtray in sight. And it's true. Nobody smokes anymore in that house. And there aren't signs up that say no smoking. It's just that the people that go there do not smoke. But it is the privilege of the new person coming in to redecorate the house. And the timing has always been such that in 7, 10, whatever years intervening, it needs it. Things need to be recovered. And much of that furniture is, shall we say, recycled, recovered, and fresh paint, and that sort of thing. And I think probably everybody has used a decorator. You almost have to, in that you really don't have access to fabrics and things that you need to do it without going through a decorator. You need a professional, perhaps for ideas, but certainly for resource material and so on. I almost think you'd have to. The dining room table, which is of course English and is a very beautiful table, we bought because the Strattons wanted their table. Well, actually, it's here now. It's in the McLaurin room. But we all added something, I guess, in our way, some of which stayed and some of which didn't. You asked me what was the best thing, and well, I think just being there, just being a part of a very active, wonderful place, lots of things going on. I think that probably was the best part of being there, just being a part of it. Did you say the worst
The
thing?
most difficult thing.
The most
Never say the worst
difficult.
thing.
No,
The most difficult part of being president.
the most difficult. I don't know. I don't know what would have been the most difficult.
Were there times that you thought to yourself, well, what am I going to do now?
About something?
Right.
Oh, I'm sure there were, yeah. Yes, I'm sure there were. But mostly it was just a wonderful place to be and to do and to be a part of.
Uh-huh. And when you look at your own daughters or daughters-in-law or your sons and think about the way women's lives have changed, and your comment earlier that it's important to think about your role in relation to your husband, what's going to happen to either men or women who become executives and don't have spouses who are available like you were and chose to be.
Yeah. Well, I have a daughter who's a lawyer, and I think she's probably done things differently than I know she has than I did at the same time, but I don't know quite how to answer that. I think there are so many things that come into our lives, not just your mother or your father, but your school and your friends and things that happen around you, that I guess it all adds up to what that person does or doesn't do.
But it's just as you said in your talk, that the world impacts on your life.
Very definitely.
In so
I
many
think
ways.
it does.
And do you,
yeah.
I mean, do you think, could you visualize your daughter filling the role that, or one of your sons perhaps filling the supportive role that you saw as yours at the time?
Not my sons, no. No, I don't think so. I think they're very much themselves, and I don't think that I can see them supporting somebody else in a role. No, I don't see it in my family. Now, that doesn't mean it couldn't happen in somebody else's family.
Right. Do you see
but not mine.
Do you see your daughters-in-law or your daughter in that kind of supportive role that you played?
No, my daughter's, I would say, more dominant.
Mm-hmm. So it's a real...
She works very hard and long hours and travels, and no, I think she does a lot.
And when you go back to thinking about what your supportive role was, and when you said that when wives weren't interested, that it really created a very different scene for the president. Do you think it would be harder to be president if you didn't have a supportive spouse?
Yes, I do. Sure. Yes, I do. I think you need a place to come home to and somebody to bounce ideas off, or somebody to say what's happened or not happened. We had one bachelor that was president. Oddly enough, his name was Stratton, Samuel Stratton. I believe he was a bachelor. Mm-hmm. But I think all the others have been married. Mm-hmm. And wives were very supportive. Mm-hmm. In this case.
And when you say you need people to bounce ideas off of, did you feel that you heard a great deal of what was going on even during the times when people were so...
yes.
I mean, I remember Barbara Bush talking about pillow talk, for example.
Yes, you remember that from the movie. Yes, it is true, sure. And then if something happens or something is going to be decided or something, then you say, well, what happened? How did that go? Or what did this happen? And it may be 2 weeks later, or it could be 2 months later. Mm-hmm. And so you do sort of stay as an ongoing part of it. And, in a sense, you're confident in that you know a lot of things that other people don't know. Mm-hmm. That are happening, or about themselves, or about what's going to happen, or about
that would sometimes be worrisome.
Yeah, you know a lot of things you'd never tell, and I'm sure that's true of everybody.
I was gonna say such as, but
No.
how do you think things will change when there is a woman president at MIT and is a first husband or a first man or however it would be phrased? How do you think that will change?
You're asking me if there would be a woman president of MIT.
When there is a woman president.
Or not would there, but when there is. Well, I don't think I'll live to see it. But I think that it could happen. I think that women have done very well in many places, but I think that top brass ring eludes a lot of them. And it's close, but it's not quite there yet.
For this institution, because that's not
For
true
this
of other-
institution,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily true of others. I think a woman is now president of Duke, and that's, after all, a big university. And it's a big change for her. And it's got a lot to be coped with.
Given, I'm going to switch topics a bit, and given the fact that women are thinking so much more about their own careers, what do you think is going to be the role of volunteerism, activities like the Women's League at an institution like this?
Well, it's had a rough 10 years. There's no doubt about it, because in the mid-'70s, late '70s, early '80s, women went back to work, or women finished graduate or school or something like that and went to work, and they're still working. And they're teaching, or they're researching, or they're professionals of some sort. And given the economy and the interests of women doing what they're doing, I can't see that it would change. I think women are going to continue to push and try to get there.
Do you think that's a loss for a place like MIT?
No. Oh, no, not really. But the days of coming in for teas or just to play bridge or more casual things, there aren't as many people doing that now as there used to be. Don't think.
And what about the transitions in your life out of the presidency? Was that a major change for you?
Well, when Jim Killian retired, Howard became chairman. And of course, we just moved down the street, as it were. And so we had somewhat the same function in that we lived on the campus. We entertained the corporation or at corporation meetings. The chairman, by and large, over the years, has been the chief fundraiser for the Institute. So we did a lot of that sort of thing, a lot of travel, a lot of alumni things. And so it wasn't a traumatic break.
It wasn't a major change.
No, it wasn't like you had to start all over again someplace. I was still here. And for a long time, really.
So the transition wasn't
Was not difficult, no.
major.
Not at all for us.
What are some of your recollections of the Killians? Want to talk a little bit about?
Well, Liz is gone, so of course you can't interview her.
Right, sadly.
When we first came here, he was president, that's true. Liz had serious health problems, as you know. She was an absolutely remarkable, I would ask her things about people. Do you know so-and-so, or what happened in 19-something or other? And she'd look at me, and frequently she maybe didn't know. And the next time I'd see her, she'd say, you know, you asked me about something, and then she'd give me the complete line of it. But for all those series of strokes that she had, she really, her mind was wonderful. She just worked through whatever the problem was, and she was a remarkable person. She really was. She really was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Jim?
Well, Jim was, for me, I would say, always friendly, but he was kind of austere, and he was to me, more of a reserved kind of a person. And he played his cards close to the chest, as the expression goes. He was not open and outgoing and very, he was a quiet person.
Mm-hmm. And when Howard was president, what about did you have to take precautions about the kinds of relationships you had with other people who were part of the administration so that you wouldn't be, accused of favoritism or anything like that? Did those issues come up at all?
No, not really. I think that it is true. You know many, many people, and you meet many people, and if anything, you do somehow feel at various times, not exactly loneliness, but that you have a certain superficial relationship, a very surface social kind of a thing, not great depth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's true in a corporate situation. I know it is. It's lonely at the top for people.
Mm-hmm.
Always has been.
Mm-hmm.
And to a certain extent, it's probably true in
you
academia.
can't cultivate
Yeah.
deep
Yeah,
friendships
it's a little harder.
because of time constraints and also because of what
That's right. It's different, yes.
your role is.
But we all had our own friends, and I think in my case, I had friends outside of the Institute
Mm-hmm.
too,
Mm-hmm.
that we met different places or where we lived before we were in that job.
Right.
And I still have friends from way back then.
Uh-huh.
So the older we get, as you know, the more you treasure your friends,
Right,
long standing,
Right.
and
yeah.
that's true.
Well, does your family now sit and reflect on those years from 66 to
No.
71?
Subject rarely comes up.
Really?
No,
Uh-huh.
no, not at all.
And what about between you and Howard? Is that something that you talk about very much, or it's...
No, not really. No, I wouldn't say so.
Uh-huh. Life has moved.
You go with the flow of your life, and
Uh-huh.
no, we don't talk about it a lot.
Uh-huh.
No.
But you remember it, certainly.
Yes. Oh, sure. With a good feeling.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Does MIT become your life at that point? I mean, I know obviously you're here and it's a major part of your life, but is it kind of everything based around it, the community of MIT, that type of idea?
At that time?
Yes. So why
Your life is very much revolves around living here, being a part of it, going to things. It seemed over the years, for a while, we went to an awful lot of funerals, which is a little bit bizarre to say, but it's true. It's just part of your ongoing. You knew these people, you liked them.
Right.
You worked with them, or you socialized with them. They were a part of your life.
Did you think of it as your career? I mean, if somebody said to you, if you were sitting, this is a question that comes up for women all the time, if somebody turns to you and says, and what do you do?
Yes. Well, the word career has always kind of bothered me, because to me career is a very structured thing. You're a psychologist, or you're an accountant, or you're a lawyer. That's your career. Well, I wasn't any of those things. And so I never thought of it as a career, per se, no.
Mm-hmm.
No, I didn't.
And if people said, and what do you do? Looked at you with piercing eyes. And
what did I say? Well, probably something rather not too bright, really.
uh-huh. Well, are there other things, Betty, that you would like to talk about that we have overlooked?
Well, I can't think of much, except to say that I think MIT is a very special place, and I think I'm very, very lucky to have been here all these years.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate it.
Had you known about MIT when you were growing up?
Well, I knew the name. I grew up in the Midwest, and I went to a little school in Ohio. And I did know it, yes, but my father wasn't an engineer, and I wasn't really tuned into it as such. No, not really.
So it was a whole new world.
It was a whole new world, yeah.
For you, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Meeting all these,
Yeah.
the techies or
Yeah.
the nerds or
It was, yeah, the
whatever.
nerds. It was all new, yes, and pretty wonderful.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, are there other things, Chris, that you think about? Is there anything else you'd want to say about women and the changing roles of women, maybe, that we haven't touched on?
Not really. No, I don't think so. I'm a pretty good women's liberal, so are you. But you
Right,
know, I'm
right.
not out waving the flag. I think it has to be slow and gradual, and as those things flow. And
Right, were you?
I think there are peaks and valleys. I think things go along, and women take a big step forward, and then I think things kind of coast. And it's not all going to happen overnight by any means. And
Yeah, I'm always interested in your
there
remarks.
always will be some differences, you know. Somebody has to take time out and have the next generation and so on. It makes a difference, I think, to a certain extent.
Do you think, let me ask another question in relation to women's roles. Do you think that somebody in a role as president can devote as much time as they would like to, or as much time as a spouse would like them to being a parent, for example?
Well, I think you always look back over parenting and think you could have done better, might have done things some differently. I know I would have if I could do some things over again. But you can't, so you know, you did what was best at the time. I don't think my children suffered terribly, no, because their father wasn't home for dinner every night or some such thing. No, no.
You didn't feel that.